Good day, everybody. Welcome to Hospitality Talks. Terrific to be back with you and bringing you conversation from Africa today. Africa is the second fastest growing tourism market in the world, and its immense tourism potential is just starting to be unlocked. Africa's hotel industry, relative to the rest of the world, is still in its infancy and is being transformed not only by more local investors developing this sector, but also foreign investments are keen to have presence in this marketplace. Africa enjoyed some respite as one of the last regions to see an outbreak of COVID 19. But unfortunately, the region and the sector has faced full impact of pandemic since the beginning of the year. The continent has managed pandemic well from public health perspective, possibly drawing on lessons learned from other health crises. Travel and tourism sector in the region is one of the key growth drivers, contributing more than 8% of the continent's GDP, but it continues to face challenges as a result of closed borders, cross-border travel restrictions, and lack of clear guidelines for the travelers. I'm Abid Butt. Great to be here with you. And as always, I have our co-host, Sam Eric Rutman. Sam.
Thank you, Abid. I think also it's very nice that we are back to Africa again. I was reading, someone calls it the magic continent, and it's really that where the substantial and the future of the growth in the tourism industry will happen. Particularly, the today's travelers are looking for what we call experiential travel. They are looking for visiting historical monuments from centuries of going back, with the rich cultures in the various areas. Not talking about fashion, which is fantastic, or the music industry in Africa. Those are something that excites me very much, and I'm very sure that this is all I'm shared by many people. So I think when now we are in the sense of finding out from our great panelists about how they see, and they can share with us how they see the market for Africa. So and while I'm here still, I would like to welcome the live viewers, and please put in your comments. Also write in where you are viewing from, and if you have any specific question to our panelists, I will be very happy to share them on the screen to get your acknowledgement that you are with us. So with that said, let's bring the panel together.
Thank you, Sam. As we begin our conversation with our esteemed panelists, we must recognize that Africa is a gigantic, vast, and diverse landmass with 54 nations surrounded by two oceans, the Atlantic and Indian, and the Mediterranean Sea to the north, world's second largest and second most populous continent. It's not one country. While there are some common patterns, it is difficult to overlook local and regional nuances, and I'm sure this will come up throughout the conversation. But let me introduce our panelists. We are fortunate to have with us Wayne Goodwin, who is Senior Vice President with JLL Hotels and Hospitality Group. Wayne has spent over 12 years in the hospitality real estate space and has completed assignments across 35 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. As Senior Vice President of the JLL Hotels and Hospitality Group, Wayne leads JLL's strategic advisory services to local, regional, and global clients across the region that include hospitality and mixed-use feasibility studies, asset valuation, operator selections, and management contract negotiations. We also have with us today Bernard Micallef, who is Senior Industry Specialist with IFC, with a long-standing global experience in the hospitality industry. Bernard has led has held various positions with leading hotel companies around the world. As senior industry specialist at IFC, his role is to provide industry expertise and analysis throughout the project investment cycle, including establishing the strategy for the hotel investment, business development, screening, and appraising the hotel investments. And last but not least, Oum-Hani Saaf, who is Regional Director of Sales, Morocco with Iberostar Group. She is responsible for developing, directing, and implementing sales strategies to generate and maximize overall revenues for Iberostar portfolio. And she is very actively involved in Regional Council of Agadir and takes an active role in destination related conversations. So we will hear about Morocco as a destination and what is being done with boots on the ground. So, Wayne, Bernard, and Oum-Hani, welcome to Hospitality Talks. So we will start the conversation with Wayne. Wayne, you have a broader viewpoint across multiple geographies, across different hotel companies, different clients. Talk to us a little bit about just a very, very brief overview of what is the state of affairs for the industry in Africa today.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Abid and Sam Eric. Great to be here. Yeah, absolutely. Something very passionate to talk about hospitality and tourism in Africa. I think in many respects, it's both very much at a formative stage still, particularly by sort of global levels. I mean, we're literally looking at maybe 1% of the world's hotel supply being located in Africa. But within that context, and what you alluded to in the earlier part of your introduction, it's not a homogenous space at all. You cannot compare a lot of more mature markets such as South Africa, Mauritius, with a lot more kind of emerging markets in East and West and Central Africa. Very, very different sort of markets and stages of their various supply and demand cycles, and very much a lot that's really kind of what the key thing to identify is.
So, Wayne, talk to us about the availability of capital in Africa, and what are the current what's the current lending environment? Is liquidity available in the market? Are developers able to get access to capital to do the projects that are needed in this growing travel and tourism market?
Yes, I mean, I think absolutely it's been something we've seen growth in from a liquidity point of view. We've generally over the last 2 decades or so, we've seen the proliferation of local and regional capital and local and regional, mainly developers coming into the sector with development capital. Most of these are private companies that are looking to diversify their interests. Possibly it's a manufacturing business, possibly it's it could be a range of different businesses where hotels as a real estate class is quite an attractive, I guess, a way to diversify those interests. So a lot of the capital that has flown to date has been in that from that local and regional capital, but increasingly we're seeing attraction of international capital, and I'd say this is strongly come into play the last decade or so, ramping up to sort of pre-COVID levels, and since then, a lot of that capital hasn't gone away. It's not necessarily that we've seen new capital come into play the last 2 years, but it's actually a relatively healthy liquidity situation in play, right? Especially if you compare it to a lot of other asset classes. Hotels have enjoyed almost a disproportionate amount of acquisition volumes if you compare it from a sub-Saharan Africa perspective. And there's a number of reasons for that, and we can touch on that through the course of the discussion. But just quickly on your point around lenders and I guess the debt side of things, I think that has also been something that has historically been relatively healthy and fueled development. I think the main proponents of this have been the DFIs, right? So from a sub-Saharan Africa point of view, excluding South Africa and I would say Mauritius, where a lot of the development funding institutes have seen hospitality as a strong job creator, economic enabler, seen the commercial merits of it, and really kind of come to the sector. So that's driven a lot of the development we've seen in the sector.
Terrific.
Commercial banks have always been present, but a lot of that's to do with existing owner relationships, and they too play their important part.
Oh, Wayne, the vaccination rates in Africa are still lagging. I believe the last stat that I read from a overall continent perspective, it's somewhere around in single digits anyhow.
Mm,
It, it, Tell us a bit about the demand recovery with that
mm,
delay getting the populations
mm,
vaccinated. What is the demand recovery like? What
mm,
sectors are starting to see greener shoots? What geographies might be seeing better demand? But any thoughts on that? Now I know that there are certain nations and certain countries that have done very well, but generally speaking, throughout the
mm.
continent, it's relatively low vaccination rates.
Absolutely, and it's been incredibly disappointing, frankly, to see. And I think it's not a vaccination hesitancy issue. It's not a that the governments are not seeking vaccinations. I mean, a lot of it is the sort of vaccine nationalism that concentrated a lot of the supply into other markets around the world, and frankly, we just haven't had the supply that's needed. And I think a big challenge is obviously the logistics around actually getting vaccines around the continent. We don't have the storage facilities, we don't have the logistics networks. So whilst gateway cities and some of the key metropoles are actually seeing pretty good vaccination rates, Africa is still largely a rural continent, and the population is not getting that. So yes, that's actually a major issue. I mean, there's some good positive stories for sure. I mean, we are manufacturing a lot more vaccines locally, but it's too little, too late, frankly. And I think it's definitely playing a part in the recovery, and with the amount of pent up demand that is built up in the rest of the world, that we're now seeing this concept of revenge travel. uh, Africa needs to be part of that from a recovery point of view, and a big part of that is the vaccination levels. So you take somewhere like Mauritius and Seychelles, very, very high vaccination levels. That's not a problem. But if you take more sort of emerging economies and third, I guess, countries with lower vaccination rates, this is potentially a big problem for them.
So,
So that's the vaccination side. I think in terms of the overall recovery, look, we're pretty bullish around the leisure space. I think that this pent up demand that we've seen a lot of net household savings across Europe is up due to furlough programs and the inability to spend money, particularly on disposable income. So we think that long haul travel and leisure travel is going to be a big benefactor of this. And because maybe a family hasn't had their annual trip to, let's say, Greece or regionally or locally within Europe, now there's a bit more propensity to do something more bucket list, a bit more experiential, and we see Africa as benefiting that significantly. On the corporate side, the majority of travel is local and regional, and I think this is a big thing for the hotel sector. Much of the hotel development that has come to play to date has really focused on your big international multilateral companies, and, and appealing to them, where we really see the long-term fundamentals and opportunity being the domestic and regional corporate traveler. The cross-border, the inter-country travel. That's where we really see the big opportunity. So that's still got a long way to grow. I mean, we're still very much at a formative stage, and anyone taking a longer term view on Africa is going to look to this as sort of the real opportunity and thesis for investment.
So, Wayne, keeping the vaccination rates in mind, and the next hurdle would be gaining consumer confidence so that they feel comfortable traveling into the region
Yeah.
without any fears of being
Mm,
infected, and the knock on effect on investments thereon.
mm,
Are the investors feeling bullish about opportunities in Africa, and what's the
mm,
investors sentiment like, or is everybody
mm,
sort of waiting on the sidelines, waiting for greater
mm.
deals?
Look, I think everyone's aligned on the fact that the long term fundamentals are there. I mean, we're looking at a continent with 1% of the world's hotel supply. And in 2016, which was our peak transaction volumes, we enjoyed a whole 1% of the world's transaction volumes from a hospitality point of view. This is a continent that within the next 30 years will have 40% of the world's population. There's a huge demographic dividend that's going to drive growth. Consumers, travelers, it's a young demographic. It's going to be a young population that is going to travel, and hotels are going to be a big beneficiary of this. So if you take a sort of 30-year horizon, the thesis is very much there. Now, from how capital is sort of looking at that is circumspect, to be honest, in that the opportunity is clear, but it's navigating that in the short term, and what is the best way to get in now. So I think a lot of the capital that's on the sidelines is still waiting, but a lot of the capital that's already in play and already in the game is looking at this situation as quite opportunistic. You know, to date, we've never seen that many transactions occurring because there weren't that many investment grade assets that were going to trade on an open market basis. Now we're seeing more owners that need to sell, or would like to sell, not even necessarily calling these distressed sales. These are just looking at kind of prospects and looking at kind of what other interests that they have, and maybe just feeling that they need to kind of focus their interests elsewhere. So we are seeing an uptick of liquidity driven by the availability of stock, and also a resetting of pricing. Of course, pricing has come down because of COVID, and what that's meant is that there are, better value, and a lot of owners that are taking that long term horizon. So yeah, I think the picture is actually quite positive. I think we'll see more transaction volumes the next 2 years than what we've seen in 2019 and 2020. That's for sure. Those weren't high transaction volume years, but we are looking good for the next kind of 2 years from that transaction point of view, and it's all around that long term story that Africa has.
Wait, I'll turn it over to Sam, but before I do, just taking it further on your comments, the typical profile of asset owners in Africa, and I know I'm generalizing it, and I know
Mm,
I'm generalizing it
mm,
throughout, has been high net worth individuals, families that have owned these assets with other businesses. So this lodging asset or lodging hospitality sector might or might not be core business for them. Is that profile changing? Is
mm,
institutional money available in Africa, or is it
mm.
still through these families and high net worth individuals that are predominantly
Mm.
investing in this sector?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think institutional capital has been looking at it for some time and figuring out how is the best way to get in. And a lot of the challenges that we've found is, often a the ticket size for a large institutional investor is not necessarily attractive enough. So to go and buy one hotel in, say, Nigeria, Kenya, it's just not really worth their while. They need something a little bit more meaty and substantial, to make it worth their while. So where a lot of that capital has actually gone into, interestingly enough, is the owner operator platforms. So we've seen three or four really great case study examples of local operators that have emerged, often owning their own assets, getting to, say, two or three properties, having a core DNA and a brand that makes sense, and then that institutional capital coming into that platform to really supercharge its development up until something that's, quite sizable, interesting, and a great sort of success case. So I think institutional capital has come in, and it's primarily gone into the platforms, and also more recently, and I think a few sort of examples of private equity funds that focus purely on hospitality over the last 5 years or so.
Terrific. Well, thank you for that. Let me turn it over to Sam, and I'll be back with you in a moment. Sam.
Thank you. I read somewhere, and correct me if I'm wrong, that basically the tourism is dependent about 10 countries in Africa where the growth has been coming from. And one old statistic possibly is that the tourism grew from 1998 to 2015 six times faster than merchant export from Africa. So I'm interested if you could share or talk about what are the attractive frontier markets now in Africa. Which are the new markets that are you see growing and from the traditional as we know them?
Mm. Look, obviously, Sam Eric, from a tourism perspective, the growth looks great because it's coming off a low base. And there are some really great kind of success stories and markets that have emerged, and become very interesting destinations. But I think overall, it would be remiss of me not to kind of talk about some of the challenges as well. And I think airlift is a big issue. It's an expensive continent to travel around and connect within. And this, what this does is it prohibits local travel. Africans experiencing Africa. This is where we really see the growth prospects and opportunity. In many cases, the destinations are incredible. I mean, this is, I'm very biased, but of course, I honestly feel it's the most beautiful, a continent that has the most to offer, and it's not necessarily being unlocked because we don't have the infrastructure and it's expensive, etc. But I think if we talk about sort of destinations that have been very successful. Of course, everyone's aware of the safari circuits. We see these as being quite a critical, I guess, components of the overall tourism value chain, because generally people coming to safari experience other aspects, and that's been growing. Used to be the case where you would come to Africa for the safari and that would be it, whereas now there's an urban experience, there's a beach experience, there's a mountain experience, there's a cultural experience that's coming with this, there's a culinary and food and beverage experience that's also coming with it. So I think unlocking those aspects and not just the I guess the stereotypical African experience, which is unbelievable. Don't get me wrong, but I think Africa has so much more to offer. And I think particularly in an urban context, it's a misunderstood and an underestimated destination. I think in the last few years, we've seen really great demand and rise in Indian Ocean, Mauritius, Zanzibar, Seychelles, great demand coming into those markets. Cape Town is always, ranked within the top destinations on any list you have, and just offers so much. But of course, we really see the opportunity for regional travel. West Africa, we see a huge volume of travelers leaving West Africa to go into Dubai, London, Europe. but if the product existed in West Africa, beach resorts, you know, getaways 2-3 hours outside of major capitals, we'd be able to keep a lot more of our tourists locally and regionally, but also attracting that international travel. I think there's some great case studies, and they're not necessarily huge numbers, but we're seeing this sort of diaspora return driving a lot of travel. And Ghana was a great example in 2019, the year of the return, where they really kind of marketed this to diaspora Ghanaians in the US, and come discover your roots and come see what the country has to offer. And it was a great success case, right? So there's a lot more of that, and Africa is getting in tune with this, starting on destination marketing. This is very new to a lot of countries, but take an example like Rwanda, partnerships with Paris Saint-Germain and Arsenal. These are things that are starting to kind of put us on the front, of discussions around destination marketing and destination across the world.
So, is the reason being that there's a generation shift in tourism leadership, where you have a younger generation now looking at things from a little bit of a not the old school but more modern point of view, and in a way that they are reaching out for the different partnerships?
Yes, I think so. I think a lot of it's coming from the private sector, but also governments realizing that it's an incredible opportunity and it's a low-hanging fruit that you just have to turn the tap on and allow it to come, create the policy, create open skies, drop visa restrictions. And each year when we track these things, there's improvements, and they're not fast enough. I'm not going to pretend that they are, but there are improvements, and this is what we really need to kind of unlock, the real, some sizable change.
Yeah, but I was reading about the African Union Agenda 2063, and where they're predicting that the increase of 3.8 million jobs for the next 10 years. I don't know if this is an underestimated figure I'm reading now, but for the youth who is in Africa, this is such a great opportunity for them. How is the education for tourism? Are there enough of schools for them? I mean, if you are able to share a little bit from your point of view what you have seen.
Look, it's a very interesting one. I think, and it's not something I'm necessarily an expert in, but I think generally there's an undersupply of hotel schools and tourism vocational sort of training. But the ones that are there, I think, are very good in many cases. So I think generally the quality is pretty good. It's just not enough of it. But I think what's probably a more interesting kind of point to note is often when a hotel comes into a market, and we're talking maybe secondary, tertiary sort of cities where the first international hotel has come in many cases we're still seeing that in capital cities where a first internationally branded hotel is coming in many cases this is a huge job creator in that city, town, center, etc. And what we see is that a lot of the sector actually struggles, and it's a challenge for the sector in that we lose a lot of labor and qualified labor into other industries, so banking, telecoms, etc., because hotels is actually a very good breeding ground for this talent more generally into other sectors. Now, I say it's a challenge; it's obviously a good thing as well. I mean, it's a good problem to have that hotels are being seen as a breeding ground for talent, particularly young talent, local talent, into other sectors of the economy, which is critical. It absolutely is, but it is just somewhat of a challenge, and we need to offset that by having the tourism training and make sure that we're getting enough supply, because for that reason, that we are kind of creating talent to go into other sectors. In many cases, we hear reports of, staff, most of the staff complement not even really speaking English prior to joining. And within 2-3 years, very conversationally proficient in English and can use that as a I guess, a skill going into other sectors.
Yeah. Uh, you mentioned about Ghana here. I remember, was it in 2019, I was attending the Mediterranean Tourism Forum in Malta. And there was one of the kingdoms of Ghana, the whole delegation and the king came to that for a presentation. It was one of those most memorable experiences I have seen. It was very colorful and it was a very strong cultural feel that they presented. That there was a delegation of 25 delegates that came in, and just like we need more of that, because this opens the eyes for people who don't know enough, and also they should be take the opportunity to travel and to invest into countries like Ghana, for instance.
Yep, absolutely. And I mean, I think obviously the hotel sector plays an important part of giving international travelers the comfort that they know, familiarity with brands that they're comfortable with at home. And I think obviously that's an important thing. But destination marketing is critical. You know, we've seen a lot of governments, we've seen a huge amount of capital and spent on infrastructure around airports. A lot of it funded by sovereign bonds, etc. And we would like to see, and that's great. I mean, we need quality airports, and we really do have some really amazing airports on the continent now, and that's a big part of that airlift problem that I mentioned. But we've seen far too much protectionism of national airlines, and I guess strangleholds over routes, and not necessarily opening these up quick enough, and that makes it expensive. But we would like to see more focus and investment on destination marketing. I think the story that Africa can tell internationally is a really compelling one, and it's very multifaceted. You know, you just can't do justice to it in a single campaign. But I think if each country and each city and each organization is driving this improved agenda, then we're in a far better place of educating what Africa is to the consumer.
Very good. Well, thank you very much, Wayne, for this for sharing this. So let me hand over back to Abid for the final questions.
Wayne, one last question before we bring our next guest in. A thought on the development pipeline. Have the projects been delayed, canceled? What does that look like?
Yeah, definitely seen significant delays. I think what's important to kind of mention is the pipeline. The pipeline is sort of always something in inverted commas, because inherently it's a challenging environment to actually get hotels from conceptualization to opening. So we see huge announcements of the volume of hotels that have been planned and announced, but very few ever come to fruition, even pre-COVID, right? And I think there's a myriad of challenges around this. It's difficult to source materials. Expense overruns can be significant. If you don't have the right professionals working with you, that certainly has a big impact. So it is always challenging. So you throw COVID into the mix, and it definitely makes a big difference. We sort of see that unless a hotel is fully funded, and there's capital in play, you can really sort of take it with a pinch of salt as to whether it's actually going to open one day. So we look closely at the promoters, closely at who's involved and what capital is in the picture. And I think what while that may sound quite negative, I mean we are still seeing a healthy-ish development pipeline despite what we're talking about from an impact of COVID, which is significant. And that the thesis around that is clearly that if you're developing a hotel now in Africa, it's not going to open before 2024, probably, right? Well after we've seen sort of the impact of COVID, and we all, of course, hope that life is back to normal by that stage. So many developers are taking this bet in that they're saying, well, if I start my hotel now, I'm looking at a post-COVID environment. And also, many of the developers that were looking at projects and had a pipeline are going to fall by the wayside because of COVID. And I'm potentially opening in even a less competitive market. Now, that's, of course, a statement that you really have to unpack in each street corner to know whether it's true or not, and it will be true in some markets, but certainly not true in all of them. So yeah, I think a
Great.
relatively healthy pipeline, but the big challenge is capital. I mean, there's very little debt available for new developments. Most of the banks and DFIs are focusing on supporting existing owners. Rather, the mantra has shifted from creating jobs to saving jobs, and I think that's probably a short to medium term
Terrific.
prognosis, but something that's probably quite fair as well.
Well, thank you, Wayne. Please stay with us. We'll have you back in a moment, but let's bring Bernard Micallef up, Sam, if it's okay. Bernard, thank you for taking the time and joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Bernard, you have been involved in the continent for a long time, from your personal time spent there, but also in your current role. You've been dealing with the continent for a while. Any quick summary of what has changed today in the continent, good, bad, and different?
Well, I mean, Wayne alluded to quite a bit in his in the previous discussion. I think from our perspective, IFC has been on the continent since 1967. And that's when the first project was done. That's going back to the Intercontinental in Nairobi. And since then has done over 100 projects. We have been very active there. I think what has changed is probably the type of investor or the type of investor that is looking for hotels. The major issues that Wayne alluded to earlier on the development part have pretty much remained the same, i.e. that it takes a fairly long time to develop a hotel. Typically, minimum from our experience, it's over, on average, a 4-year program to get from breaking ground to actually opening it. I think that has been very, very much what we've seen. And also a number of projects have been sort of plagued with cost overruns. Another thing I think what has been seen is the pipelines have grown considerably over the years, and we've seen that, especially in the last few years, pipeline has increased, to double-digit numbers all over. But then there has also been a large wash. So if you, on average, 50% of the pipeline announced never makes it through for one reason or another. Pipelines have either stalled or never get finished for 9 times out of 10 poor planning and lack of funding.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, from your lens, Bernard, are there specific markets within the continent that are more attractive and that show most potential? Your thoughts, please.
Yeah, I think if you look at the pipeline today and what has been announced, and when I say pipeline, it's more the pipeline that's been announced by the brands. On the continent, you're looking at something like 80,000 keys that need to come, that were planned to come in between over the next 3 to 5 years. The majority of that is in sub-Saharan Africa. I think it's around 50,000 keys, with Nigeria, Ghana, and Senegal, and possibly Ivory Coast leading the pack on West Africa. East Africa, there was a heavy pipeline in Ethiopia and Kenya. Now today, Ethiopia probably might have a bit of a stall going forward for obvious reasons, but those were the two major countries, Ethiopia and Kenya. And then on the North African side, Egypt has always led the pipeline growth for a number of years, followed, a bit at a distance with, how can I explain, with Morocco. So I think but if we look more than the countries, if today you look at all the capital cities in, let's say, sub-Saharan Africa, they are all very well or fairly well supplied. You know, if you look back maybe 5, 6 years ago, some cities had no hotels whatsoever, no branded hotels. Today, every city has a good upscale or upper upscale hotel available. So I think it's more from an IFC perspective. We are more looking at what are the next categories that should come onto the market. And I think there's a space for definitely the apart hotel concept coming in, possibly the economy brand coming in. And another thing that I keep, and Wayne alluded it to earlier on, is the resorts. And I think, you know, most of the continent has pristine beachfronts, untouched, unspoiled, and that is what is lacking. Today, there is no how can I explain now? A possibly upper mid-scale, upscale resort where the regional traveler can go and explore. I'm not talking, and I
Okay.
don't think there is space for these $450 a night. The people that can afford that will leave the continent, but I think on the upper mid-scale, upscale, uh, semi-all inclusive, possibly. I like to use the term a tweaked club med. You know, I think there is big space for those players.
Well, look, the luxury establishment has been around in Africa and sort of led the market up until now. But the demographics, travelers' demographics are changing. And also, as Wayne and yourself had talked about, that the development costs are substantial in the region. So building a luxury establishment costs a pretty penny. In our industry, as we all know, is a bit of a derivative industry. Airlift has a lot to do with bringing visitors in. Having said all this, dealing with the pandemic, the accessibility, availability of capital, from your lens, Bernard, are you seeing Africa as a seller's market or buyer's market?
Whew. I think it's more of a wait and see. I think there are buyers, but the buyers want a good price at the moment. I think it's all price related. We've seen, strangely enough, IFC had also, you know, in its COVID response strategy, had made a facility available for acquisitions of distressed assets. The distressed asset is not there yet, and I don't think we will see it for at least another, you know, 3 to 6 months. If, and that's a big if it comes. I think so
Yeah.
far lenders have been very patient. I think they will continue to be patient, and that is the way going forward. This is not a country issue. It's not a project issue. It's a global issue. So I think everybody's in it together at the moment.
And quite candidly, public health, it's not like you can rebrand the hotel or bring a new operating team and it'll start to perform differently overnight. It's a public health issue. So, in many ways, I can understand why lenders would be so patient. One more question before I turn it over to Sam, Bernard. As you evaluate these investment opportunities, and you alluded to branded hotels that are taking hold in a lot of these markets. Is there a difference in performance of brands versus independent hotels? Do you prefer one over the other? Do they tend to behave differently?
Definitely, they do behave differently. I think a branded hotel will need to also differentiate between, is the branded hotel a franchise model or a management agreement or a management contract, and then there's an international brand and a regional brand. They all have their own, I would say, advantages and disadvantages, but principally the branded hotel, in my view, brings that strong marketing muscle, brings revenue to the hotels, and I think that is key. With the, and then the management side becomes, I would say, a secondary point. But I think going forward, we should expect to see some conversions from, let's say, independent and maybe even regional brands to more international brands. And I think we will also see more brands coming into the continent. Definitely. I think we've already started to see and hear about it. And I think we'll see it more and more going forward, with more secondary brands and possibly even some brands created for the continent itself.
So Africa has had a lot of the homegrown brands, if I may use that terminology, and they've done wonderfully well because, as we spoke earlier, the typical profile of a lodging sector investor is high net worth individual, owner operator model, and that's how it's been. As we all know, in a lot of the mature markets, lenders almost force a brand or a distribution channel and or a professional management company. Is Africa poised for white label third party management companies, or
Oh, yes.
do you think that's still way far
Uh,
away?
no, it's actually starting. We're starting to see it emerge slowly. There are a couple of companies that are taking on, but if you look at the amount of franchise agreements, that's still limited, and probably it's a chicken and egg situation. If you get the franchise agreements, then automatically the third party management contract companies will come in. Without that, I don't think we will see it. And if we look at the pipelines so far, or the pipelines here that have been announced, the majority are all managed and not
Oh,
franchised.
okay. Well, thank you, Bernard. Let me turn it over to Sam, and I'll be back with you in a moment. Sam.
Thank you. Bernard, I'm interested to learn more. I mean, if you can share what are the markets with the biggest opportunities in Africa? We discussed that earlier a little bit with Wayne, but what is your take? Where do you see Africa moving, and what are the biggest opportunities coming up in which markets?
I think the biggest opportunities, according to the pipelines that have been announced, you've got the Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, Ivory Coast, I think Ethiopia, Kenya, and then possibly in North Africa you will see the likes of Egypt and Morocco, and these have been all the major players, and possibly even South Africa to a certain extent. So I think there is where we will see the bulk of the pipelines going forward. But then you will have the odd, I would say, uh, opportunities, but not on a large scale in countries like Djibouti and Cameroon.
Okay, very good. Now we had experienced the COVID and other issues. What has changed in your project review process as a result of this, or has there been any change?
Um, uh, Principally, we have remained assessing our projects in pretty much the same way. I think the only difference at this stage, uh, given we had a COVID response facility, one of the criteria was mainly to ensure that the group or the companies we were looking at were in a good standing prior to COVID. And I think that is probably the only change I would say that we've really sort of had to address going forward. But other than that, our our processes were already rigorous in their own way. So I don't. I think adding more is probably a bit of a comes with it. You know what I mean? I mean,
Yeah,
sort
yeah.
of, but other than that, the major issue was we what was important was that the company was in good standing prior to going into COVID.
My final question is because I'm interested in Africa, and I'm interested in the culture, the music, the fashion, what Africa actually represents in many ways. Do you see, I mean, some growth of homegrown brands? Meaning, it was mentioned earlier, but I'm looking at that young entrepreneur generation who are disruptors, who are looking to do something very different than the traditional hoteliers as we know it. Any thoughts on this?
There are quite a few already. I mean, let us not be sort of let, it's not a case that there aren't. I mean, I can mention a good dozen off my head, that have been homegrown. and I think we will continue to see a few more of these. I think but personally, I think if it has to grow now, it needs to grow a bit differently and pull away from. I think we're going forward. It needs the given the demographics and the younger generations, we're going to pull away from this traditional type of hotel and go to something more trendy, more hip, more lifestyle.
Yeah, I'd love to visit one of those places one of these days.
They'll come. That'd be. I foresee quite a few coming onto the market, possibly within the next 3 to 5 years. I
Well,
could see that happening.
Well, thank you very much, Bernard, and over to you, Abid.
Bernard, you talked earlier that you have not seen quote unquote distress in the market, and possibly it might happen in the coming 6 months if it does. As you are looking at investment opportunities, how do you value an asset with lack of comps or cap rates or capital typically is chasing the highest yield and local capital? I'm sure it's a logistic investment versus hotel investment versus something else that is competing for the same capital. Walk us through as to what you have seen and how do you go about valuing
Yeah,
these projects,
you're
please.
right. First of all, you need to understand we predominantly invest in debt and not equity into the hotel sector. So that already changes the level of playing field. The approach to valuations hasn't changed. The three methods that traditionally have been used are still there, but it comes into question. There's also, if we use the income approach, there's also at the moment there's a question on recovery. There's still a lack of clarity on that. So on what number are you going to base that? Comparatives are very limited on the continent. So it's very, very difficult to find a comparative sale, usually of a property. And that leaves you, and then you come back to the replacement value, which we tend to look at nowadays. And it's also, is it the right approach? Probably not. But it gives maybe a level of comfort as to would it be worth, is this worth properties, as a real estate piece, or isn't it? But other than that, sort of, I think the methods have not changed and the approach has not changed.
And when you are reviewing the projects, do you prefer operating assets, greenfield development? Do you do senior debt, mezz debt, or do you do the entire projects? Any thoughts on that? So, any practices that might have worked better in your environment than the others?
There's not one price fix all. Yeah, I think the continent, each project has to be reviewed on its own merits. It's also looking at who is behind the project, the sponsor of the project, who will manage the project. I think all these come into play. I think IFC has predominantly done all sorts of, be it greenfields and be it brownfields. Today, our approach is probably slightly different. As Wayne mentioned it, we are more looking at, the working capital lines, our existing clients, keeping them going. But we've also looked at some projects recently and has been announced publicly, on the takeover of certain assets on more of the job saving. I think that still remains in play. And I think we will continue to do this for the next, probably, I would say 12 to 18 months easily. And then I think at some stage or other, will we start looking at greenfields? I said, I think yes, we will, but it will be highly selective. And again, based on market, on concept, and on sponsor.
Terrific. Well, Bernard, thank you so much for that. Please stay with us. We'll have you back in a moment. But Sam, let's bring Oum-Hani Saaf for next portion of our discussion. Oum-Hani, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I did.
Well, Oum-Hani, we were talking earlier through Wayne and Bernard about the importance of destination marketing. Well, I must confess my bias towards Morocco. It's one of the most incredible destination, rich culture, incredible
True.
food, lots of different from beaches to desert to you name it. Tell us a bit about how the destination is attracting travelers, attracting visitors to come back to Morocco, particularly in this border closing environment that we live in.
Well, Morocco, as you have said, is just a beautiful things to give. Hello, do you hear me?
Yep, yep, we here.
Yeah, yeah. With a lot of diversity, it's just a fascinating destination. Yes, the tourism was doing very well. 2019 was just an amazing year in all terms. All figures were showing green. 2021, we faced really this, like all other countries, we faced this pandemic. And Morocco, if you remember, was one from the first countries to lock down and to close sky. So tourism was affected to really, really very much. And we registered like a 70% decrease comparing 2019, with an overnight stays amounting only 6 million, while in 2018 we were kind of 25 million overnight stays. This was 2020, and we noticed a slightly increase in 21 because of the local markets. So the only market which was reacting, of course, is the local market, because the sky was closed for international one. And we are still facing this lockdown of the sky. Uh, for example, Germany, UK, Russia, and Netherlands are still closed. But we made it. We had a slightly decrease at 11% more than 2020, and we hope that things will come back fast to normal, because we have a rate of 60% vaccinated, fully vaccinated, all the citizens. So we hope that this will encourage the government to open the sky and to let the source market producing again.
Oum-Hani, from investors' perspective, what's the sentiment like for Morocco, particularly foreign investments coming in? And what does the development pipeline in Morocco looks like? Are there a lot of new hotels being planned? Is there capital available for these developments?
Yes, our government is encouraging a lot the investment in our country. And just for example, here where I'm located in Agadir, Tarazout, I've seen opening of different hotels, well branded hotels, like Hayat Regency, Rio, yeah, many. And the pipeline is still with nearly 4,000 rooms to be open in the coming years. In different area, like Dakhla, the north of Morocco. And the government is really enhancing and stimulating the tourism investing by adopting a lot of measures of incentive to incentivize and support investors in both existing and new, with many facilities like giving lands for symbolic prices, helping in terms of fiscality. A lot of measures are in place to encourage investment.
And from destinations within Morocco, if you go outside Marrakesh or Casablanca or possibly Fez, which have attracted visitors for the longest time, are there new destinations that are showing growth potential and investment potential?
As I said, Dakhla is in the south of Morocco. It's a new destination, and in addition to Taghazout, there is a new area in the north of this Taghazout. Taghazout is 20 kilometers to Agadir, and in the north there are other really lands to for investment.
Terrific. One other question for you. Generally speaking, the inbound traveler for Morocco, if we left out the domestic traveler, but inbound, can you tell us a bit about the profile of the visitor as to who has been traveling to Morocco and if that has changed in any way?
Well, traditionally, France, Germany, UK have been the main source markets to Morocco, Belgium. There are also a new emerging market like the East Europe, Poland, Russia, and they still have big potential. The domestic market, as I said, is it used to represent maximum 30% of our income. But it was the only one who really saved the destinations during the COVID. And the German, as I say, German, UK, and French are the main traditionally have been always the main markets.
Ah, Oum-Hani, one other question before I turn it over to Sam. How has your efforts, your initiatives that you do dealing with the clients, dealing with the tour operators, how has that changed? What are they asking you as you go to visit with them, enticing them to visit Morocco in your hotels?
Well, in the past, we were always talking about all the beautiful things we have, and now we are adding additional unique selling points. From my personal experience, I'm talking about how my company is taking care of this COVID situation by giving a really healthy protocol with around 300 measures coming from the room till the restaurant till the even the insurance. We are even giving insurance to our direct clients who might have the COVID, to insure for them, for example, to stay in the room if they have to, or to bring them the food to the room. And so the whole process of sales has a bit changed. We are, for example, we are becoming more flexible with all the travel agencies, without the client. You are not, if I say, for example, we are not charging cancellations, because we know that a client who booked might have changed all his plan because of this pandemic. This is the main issues which affected our sales process. And also, of course, we are highlighting all the unique selling points, like, for example, the sustainable tourism that Iberostar are implementing in our hotels, with our movement wave of change, which is total respect of environment. So such things, yeah.
Terrific. Well, thank you for that. Let me hand it over to Sam, and I'll be back with you in a moment.
Right.
Sam.
Thank you. Um, I visited Morocco once, and it was one of the most memorable experiences. I spent 1 week going to places. This was not for holiday; this was for work, so I didn't have a chance to absorb Marrakesh or Rabat or Casablanca or Fez as much as I would. I was wondering how long. What is sort of the average stay of tourists coming into Morocco? Is there a change there, or what is your view on
Well,
the length of
yeah,
stay?
it depends on the destination. For example, if Agadir is in a big dependence of the tour operator. So the average of stay might go from five, 4 till 5. While if you go to Marrakesh, there are a lot of low cost flights, and there are a lot of clients going only for the weekend. So the length of stay is lower in Marrakesh than in Agadir. Casablanca is predominated by the business, is a business destination like Tangier, so it's even lower than Marrakesh.
Yeah. Uh, Countries that are focusing on tourism usually have a very strong ministry of tourism. What is the ministry doing to market and getting involved in marketing Morocco now for 2022?
Well, the Ministry of Tourism develop and implements the tourism policy first for the government throughout all the bodies that represent this department. And we have another tool, which is the Moroccan Tourism Office. And this one promotes, commercialize, and develop the Morocco as a tourist destination, stimulate the air travel, and we have also a Moroccan agency for tourism development, which promotes investment opportunities and offers guidance to investor and operator in the tourism industry. The Office of Tourism is also helped by 7 regional offices and 18 provincial units. Their main tasks are to supervise the quality of tourist attractivities and monitor the development of the tourist products in both local and regional level. Of course, the National Office of Tourism, they are making a lot of things to help us, like establishing partnership with the leader of the tourism, developing many communication program, enhance all the competitiveness and of air transport. For example, sometimes they are even subsidizing or participating in the empty legs, if we can say, just that a tour operator can bring tourists to the destination. And as I say, they stimulate also the tourist investment by adopting many measures.
Very good. Well, thank you very much. And for the final questions, let me hand over back to
Thank
Abid.
you.
One quick question, Oum-Hani, and then we'll bring everybody back in. Morocco, for the longest time, have had these very small, very high quality riads and medinas and independent hotels, if you would. Obviously, there are more brands that are coming into the marketplace.
Yes.
There are different demands. I know you represent a brand yourself, but from a cultural tourism point of view, how are brands competing with these iconic riads that are steeped in heritage and culture?
Well, it's different. The experience in Riyadh is totally different than experience in a branded hotel. For me, I was okay. It's magical. It's but like an international brand has its structure, its policy. Um, Yeah, what can I say? Both are for me. I would go to Riyadh because I love this magical places. But also, if you tell me if I recommend a branded hotel or a just independent domestic one, I would say branded one because in the brand hotel you find the software, even the hardware is there, okay, you have the nice rooms, but if the software isn't continuously existing, yeah, then you lose a bit the clients. And an Iberostar client is expecting the same service if he goes to Dominican Republic or if he goes to Agadir and he finds it. So that makes the difference.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for that, Sam. Let's bring everybody back in. In Wayne, if I may ask you the next question, uh, in your opinion, from your lens, what can the industry do to expedite the recovery?
Yeah, look. I think there's a lot that can be done, and there's a lot that we sort of can't do. I think from a government perspective, I think there's a lot that can be done around making travel easier, making visas easier, promoting open skies, etc. And that's going to definitely facilitate a recovery. But I really like what Bernard said around orientating the product to better suit the local market. If we can do that, I think that's also a part of it, and not just what works in Europe or America or Asia is necessarily going to work in Africa. So I think there is quite a lot that can be done, both in the short term, which is very much kind of a policy perspective, and making sure that we're getting our vaccination rates up and getting comfort around the safety and of travel to Africa. Medium term, obviously, short to medium term being policy and making it easier to travel, and longer term, creating that product and destination that attracts both local and international arrivals. But also big focus on that destination marketing. I think that's absolutely critical.
Well, Bernard, have you seen any best practices around the different countries in Africa where recovery is better than the other markets? Now, we've all talked about destination marketing. The irony is that a lot of the destination marketing companies or local DMCs, their budgets were wiped out overnight, so they don't really have the money to carry the message out. But have you seen any practices that you think seem to be working, Bernard?
I think we need to differentiate. I think when it comes to the destination marketing, probably it's more for the leisure tourist. And then when we come to business and corporate travel, that is a totally different approach. I think, yes, I agree. The destination marketing is important for the leisure side, for definitely. But I think what needs to best practices, I don't think we've seen so far, or I haven't come across. Let's put there could be, but I haven't come across. I think the recovery in general has been sluggish. We've had some, when we looked at our portfolio, we have that odd property in one particular destination, for example, that's outperformed, but the rest has been pretty sluggish, I would say. The bulk of the problem revolves around obviously the vaccination rollout. I think that's key if you want the recovery, and I would use one other word as harmonization. If the continent come onto a harmonization for travel, which makes travel internally not as complicated and possibly as expensive to get around, then I think we will start to see organizations letting the corporate travel come back. I think then there's the MICE segment, which is quite strong typically in sub-Saharan Africa. That still needs to be seen. Will it come back? Yes, it will. Will it happen it is happening as we speak in smaller uh, groups,
Oops.
because obviously, most or parts of Africa don't have the facility to do what we're doing right now. The bandwidths are not possibly there, and the salespeople need to get that face to face. It's not a case of, we can pick up the phone and call. I think the face to face on the continent is needed.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Bernard, one other question for you. With COP26 that has just been going on, sustainability is front and center. It's being talked about. It has always been talked about. And Oum-Hani briefly referred to Iberostar's efforts. When you are evaluating projects, is that an
Yes.
important element from a destination perspective and the asset, or how do you think the industry can embrace the sustainability initiatives better?
I think the sustainability is being thrown around in all shapes and forms at the moment. But I think we do assess. I think today, even more than before, IFC has always had the facility that looked at the greening part. We have the EDGE certification, so projects could actually get certified by our own EDGE, and has been happening. I think going forward, we will see more and more of it, and I think it's inevitable. I think it's there. It's coming out even more, and it's going to be. Most of the brands have it in place. It's just a case of now taking it to the next level. I think we've played with it. We haven't really sort of imposed it. How can I explain? And I say when I say we, the industry, we've started off with the towel business. That was more of a saving. That you were in the business, but it was more to save money than to actually take care of the environment. But I think going forward, it people have become more conscious. I think the younger generations in particular are even more conscious than probably you and me. And I think it is important, and it will have to take forefront going forward.
Well said, quite candidly. We have sort of dipped our toes in this initiative, and some markets, some hotels do a better job than the others, but there isn't been a cohesive initiative put forth. Oum-Hani, a question for you, if I may ask. Any disruptors that you see coming into the marketplace, particularly in Morocco, but generally from an industry point of view? Well, in many ways, to be honest, the Airbnb model had been practiced for the longest time in markets like Morocco and in some of the Medinas. But do you see any other disruptors?
Well, it has been always inform. We call it here informal tourism. We had always people renting houses even without any platform, which like Airbnb. Yes, it disturbed, and the ministry. One of the main issues that it's fighting for is to this informal tourism. Airbnb is not yet still really strong in Morocco, like Uber, for example, in terms of transportation. But yes, it might be something which annoy the tourism. And we have seen. Was talking to my colleagues this morning, and there is a generation which prefer to go to Airbnb and use Uber because it's cheaper, because it's fast, because of. So yeah, it's a trend, and we have to take it into consideration. And but we still in Morocco. We are still far. It's not like in Spain, or where all my friends are using Airbnb, comparing to these two countries.
That speaks to the consumer behavior changing, growing up.
Exactly.
Well, at least we were always told, don't go near a stranger's car, don't get into a car. Well, not only we use strangers' cars, we go and stay at strangers' houses now. So consumer behaviors are totally changed. Seb, any thoughts, any questions, or should I continue?
Well, I thought about this Airbnb. I mean, the first time I traveled by train to Hungary, Budapest, that's years ago when I was sort of doing the Interrail, and nobody talked about Airbnb, and I could not afford to stay in a fancy hotel, so I went by a railway station or a train station, and there was you could find a list of people who rented a bedroom for a night at their home for what was it for $10 at the time. So and you had a great breakfast, and that's how I traveled in Europe, and I think it's just been now there's a brand about this, but it's been around for the longest time. But I think that Airbnb has done a terrific job in growing into a mainstream business. But I have actually a question, and we've been talking all about this very business-like. But I'm interested to know what you have learned from the pandemic period. Something that you want to share about yourself. It would be very interesting. Maybe the viewers would enjoy hearing this. So, if we could start with Wayne, anything you want to share? What you have learned personally from the period of pandemic?
Sure. Look, I think a very, very pertinent question. I mean, I think it absolutely has taught us the value, I guess, of personal wellness, and also sustainability. And we're seeing that kind of come into our business now, and being kind of at the forefront of how travel is being undertaken. So absolutely, I think for many of us that crisscrossed the continent and spent a lot of time dealing with the challenging travel situation. It was an opportunity to spend time at home, be close to family, and I think that was a real sort of positive to come out of it. But I think from our perspective, the show must go on, and we've got to kind of get things going again and get things moving, and the virus is not going away. We've got to live with it, and as a sector, we've got to learn to manage it, and how do we coexist alongside it. So yeah, I think a very, very interesting 18 months that I think has shaped a lot of the way we look at the world.
Yes. How about you, Bernard? What have you learned about yourself during the pandemic?
Yes, I think to me it was more the appreciation of life in general, and a better work-life balance, and possibly, that it's possible to blend work with holiday nowadays. So given that we can all work you can work remotely, we can make ourselves more accessible to a certain extent, but also find a good balance.
Yes, that's very good. And how about you, Oum-Hani?
Yes, health and family. I enjoyed staying 3 months with my kids when I thought that, okay, they are gone to the university, I will not see them anymore. So I spent great time with them. That was really a positive issue for me. And in terms of work, yes, we have never had so many web meeting with the partners, with the colleagues in the head office, such now. So yes, this is the new things that we have seen in this pandemic.
Yeah, it's been quite acceptable now to have Zoom calls and Teams calls, and now we're entering into the metaverse era where we are becoming avatars, meeting on a spaceship, having a conference. So things are changing very quickly here. Well, I don't really have any other questions, and I looked at the comments where I think I haven't received any particular questions or comments. So anything else you want to add, Abid?
One last thing, thankfully technology has facilitated conversations like this. Quite candidly, just before this session, I was speaking to some students in a hotel school based out of Dubai. And we talked about a lot of these things. Now, it wasn't all that long ago that would have just not been possible or atrociously expensive to pull off. But technology has indeed facilitated that. One last question for all three of you. One takeaway for investors and developers that are looking at Africa as a market? Bernard, if you wouldn't mind starting us out, one takeaway for investors and developers that are considering Africa as a market.
I think go in with an open mind and be ready to be patient.
Fair enough. Oum-Hani, any thoughts from you?
Consider the fantastic Morocco with its diversity and with also the workforce, because people in Morocco, they are really humble. They learn very quick. They are nice and they are good workers. So something to take into
Terrific.
consideration.
Terrific. Wayne, you get the last word on this.
Great. No, I think have I guess, a realistic framework of what your expectations are. I think there's a lot of people in the sector that have a agenda to make it seem it's very easy. It's not. But now's the time to get in from a long-term perspective. Have local partnerships are key. Associate yourself with the right advisors, and I think it's a winning road.
Well, this has been yet another fantastic conversation. Oum-Hani Saaf with the Iberostar Group, Wayne Goodwin with JLL Hotels and Hospitality Group, and Bernard Micallef with IFC. Thank you so much for your time, and thanks for your input in this conversation. I've learned a lot, so we really appreciate you joining us today. Thanks again. Sam, over to you.
And for my part, I would also like to thank all the live viewers who joined us today. And if you're watching this as a replay, thank you very much for taking the time to view our recorded session. And if you enjoy listening to our session as a podcast, we have a Hospitality Talks podcast channel. So just Google it and you'll find us there. And on behalf of Abid, myself, and all the panelists who join us today, thank you very much. And we are looking forward to seeing you in the next sessions very soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all. Thank you.
Thank you.